Korea has grown to the unprecedented, critical and imminent level. Therefore, we have to take calibrated and different responses to meet with that level of threat.
China has held a drill near its border with North Korea on how to prepare against radiation exposure following a nuclear bomb test. The Immigration and Inspection Office in Dandong says around 50 people, mainly state officials, took part in the exercise. It included a scenario of inspectors discovering a vehicle loaded with illegal radioactive material trying to cross the border from North Korea. The drill is seen as a real-life simulation as there is suspicion that a number of vehicles carrying radioactive material came through Dandong when North Korea conducted its 6th nuclear test last month.
Jose, good evening. Tonight, what amounts to a tense standoff between North Korea, where I am now, and Washington. The North Korean foreign minister vowing that this country will continue its nuclear program, while joint exercises between the US and South Korea off the coast here just wrapped up. Exercises that the North Koreans consider an extreme provocation. We came here to try to assess the views of ordinary North Koreans. And while dissent is frowned upon here, what we found are many people who say they want peace but are ready for war, even a nuclear war with America.
Our starting point to this morning, the defense chiefs of South Korea, the United States, and Japan have agreed to coordinate their efforts to resolve tensions with North Korea through pressure and diplomacy. They also vowed to maintain a high state of readiness against any further provocations from Pyongyang by holding joint military drills. Our Yoo Jun-hee starts us off.
Seoul's Defense Minister Song Young-moo met his U.S. and Japanese counterparts, James Mattis, and Itsunori Onodera, on the sidelines of the ASEAN Security Forum in the Philippines on Monday. There, the three defense chiefs agreed to support trilateral efforts to address the North Korean nuclear issue through maximum pressure. They also recognized the need to heighten their military posture by continuing to hold trilateral, ballistic missile warning, and anti-submarine warfare drills in light of the regime's growing threat. Seoul's defense chief stressed, however, that South Korea does not want to engage in conflict with the North and that it was prioritizing a peaceful solution to the crisis. But he warned that if Pyongyang were to use military force on its country, South Korea would be forced to take strong action.
We understand the weight of engaging in a war as such. We would make all efforts necessary to resolve the issue in a diplomatic and economic way.
Tokyo's defense minister, in comparison, adopted a much tougher tone on Pyongyang for its recent provocations. including a pair of missile launches that flew over Japanese territory. n.korea sounded the alarm on North Korea's growing nuclear and ballistic missile capabilities and endorsed Washington's view to consider all options on the table.
The threat posed by North Korea has grown to the unprecedented, critical and imminent level. Therefore, we have to take calibrated and different responses to meet with that level of threat.
Other ASEAN ministers at the meeting also expressed concerns about escalating tensions on the Korean Peninsula. They called on all parties to exercise restraint and work towards resuming dialogue for the peaceful denuclearization of North Korea.
North Korea reportedly is going after President Trump as a, quote, hooligan and lunatic, and warning the United States is running headlong into ruin. Let's go outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. This follows a report that the U.S. is ready to put its nuclear bombers back on 24-hour alert for the first time since the Cold War. But an Air Force spokesperson is pushing back on that, saying the current plan does not have any such movement in it, but they must be ready if directed. And President Trump is echoing that. He told Fox News yesterday that the U.S. is ready to respond to North Korea if needed. Watch.
We're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are. Wow. If we need to be. Would it be nice not to do that? The answer is yes. Will that happen? Who knows?
Let's bring in Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and a Fox News contributor and senior fellow for the American Enterprise Institute. Ambassador, always good to see you. So important to get your points of view now on this Monday. I have read an editorial that you have written, and something stood out. You said we can't let Kim Jong-Un and his bizarre regime have America by the throat. Why would you put it that way?
Well, I think that's the position we would be in if we allowed North Korea to acquire and retain the capability to hit any target in the United States with thermonuclear weapons, which they are very close to doing, as CIA Director Mike Pompeo said just a few days ago. And that's why I think the president's upcoming trip to Asia is going to be important. This meeting today, the Prime Minister of Singapore, important in its own right to be sure, but also helping to set the stage for that. I think North Korea will be probably the single most important issue for the president, certainly in his meetings in Japan, South Korea, and China, but also with the countries of Southeast Asia as well.
You know, Ambassador, you and I often talk about points of history being so important to go back to. And in your article, and today, I would love for you to tell our viewers about something that happened. Franklin Roosevelt, September 11th, 1941.
Well, you know, this was a period just obviously less than 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and President Roosevelt faced some very difficult decisions, and one of the decisions that he announced on that fireside chat on September the 11th was giving the U.S. Navy authorization to fire first at German submarines and warships, saying you don't wait when you see a rattlesnake poised to bite before you kill it, basically. And I think this is a lesson in preemption. It's a hard lesson. It's not one we want to face. But I think it's one the president needs to make clear to North Korea and to China that he's prepared to undertake, like Roosevelt did, to protect the interest of the United States. Hopefully there's still a peaceful way to get these nuclear weapons away from North Korea, but time is running out. That's the hard reality.
So what I understand you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about making a preemptive strike on North Korea, right? And we know from recent polling that most Americans don't support that. Is it time, are we getting close to the point where the president should make his own fireside chat?
Well, I don't favor it except as a last resort, but the president was very clear in his speech to the UN back in September when he said denuclearization is the only way forward for North Korea. And that is a rejection of the point of view held by Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, and many others who share their views that we could live with a nuclear North Korea. So the conversations in particular that President Trump will have with China when he visits there in just a couple of weeks, I think it's very important to lay that out to the Chinese and make it clear that we are serious and that we're very nearly out of time to make a decision here.
I'm about to quote you to you. Sit tight. You say, or rather you write, in the fireside chat, Roosevelt observed that others, quote, had refused to look the Nazi danger squarely in the eye until it actually had them by the throat. Do you think that there are some in this country who might have some power or some influence who are not looking the danger of North Korea squarely in the eye?
I think the Obama administration spent 8 years not looking the danger squarely in the eye, and I don't think they looked the Iranian threat in the eye either. During this entire period of time, they said, oh, of course we don't want these two countries to get nuclear weapons. It turns out they weren't serious about it. And when they admit, as Susan Rice did, that 25 years of prior efforts over 3 administrations had failed to stop North Korea, she said, well, now I guess we just have to accept it. I do not accept this failure. And I do not accept that the United States should be held hostage by this strange regime in North Korea or by the mullahs in Tehran while we're on the subject.
You know, Ambassador, last hour on Outnumbered, we had some breaking news with the Prime Minister of Singapore here visiting the White House. President Trump, the two of them walked out shortly ago, and they announced a deal where Singapore is going to buy Boeing planes, and they're having conversations about a whole host of things. How does North Korea come up in that conversation between those two leaders?
Well, you know, the United States and Singapore have had an outstanding relationship over decades, and Singapore is a very important ally in trying to prevent China, for example, from essentially taking over the South China Sea and making it into a Chinese province, a major player inside the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and a country that recognizes that nuclear proliferation, whether it's to North Korea or others in the Asia region, is a direct threat to them. Singapore is a tiny country, 1 nuclear weapon, and there wouldn't be a Singapore anymore. So they've cooperated with us in a variety of ways, including the Proliferation Security Initiative, to stop countries like North Korea and Iran from benefiting from the port of Singapore to acquire dangerous technology like in the nuclear field.
Real quickly before I let you go, also breaking news last hour, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson touching down in Iraq, set to meet with leaders there, including Abadi, the Prime Minister, but potentially also the President of that country. A quick thought from you.
Well, you know, the government of Iraq, sadly, is under the domination of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. It was one of the consequences of pulling American forces out in 2011. I'm not sure there's much that could be done, but I hope one message that Secretary Tillerson delivers is leave the Kurds alone. Don't take any further military steps against them. I think we should be helping the Kurds in material ways, and I hope Secretary Tillerson delivers a very strong message that Iraq and Iran are not going to solve the Kurdish problem by force.
Everybody should read your article. A lot of history in that, which is always good for everybody to see. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much.
They are closer now than they were 5 years ago, and I expect they will be closer in 5 months than they are today, absent a global effort to push back against them. That is, each test, successful or unsuccessful as defined in the West, continues to develop Kim Jong-Un and his engineers and scientists' knowledge base. They are intent upon completing that whole chain of activity, and it is the case that they are close enough now in their capabilities that from a U.S. policy perspective, we ought to behave as if we are on the cusp of them achieving that objective. We talk an awful lot about missile systems that can reach Denver and Los Angeles and New York, but there are enormous U.S. interests in South Korea, in Japan, and in Asia as well. And so we shouldn't just focus solely on this ICBM threat, but the enormous conventional weapon systems that are in the hands of this man and the other elements of their nuclear program and other delivery technologies of those nuclear weapon systems. It seems that the world is stunned that the Russians are trying to poke their hand into U.S. elections and policy. This is not a new phenomenon. The technology is different. The tools that they use are different. But this was a threat in 2016. It will be a threat in the midterm elections in 2018. It will be a threat in 2020. Until there's a new leader in Russia, I suspect it will be a threat to the United States for an awfully long time. All of USG, all of the United States government has an obligation to understand that. That's our primary task, and to deliver that understanding to the President of the United States and the team, and then for us to find ways to push back against it. And we're intent on doing it. We have a lot of resources devoted to that. And I'm optimistic that we will continue to reduce the capacity of anyone, the Chinese, the Iranians, Al-Qaeda, WikiLeaks, and the Russians, from impacting our election.
Donald Trump once again blurts out all options are on the table when dealing with North Korea. Some current and former members of his administration suggested certain options are not realistically available to the American president. But Trump continues to talk tough ahead of his Asia tour. Each one has an analysis of the controversial leader's latest remarks.
President Trump continued to up the pressure on North Korea through his interview with Fox Business Network that aired on Sunday. Trump said the United States is prepared for anything regarding North Korea and even made a possible allusion to military action by saying that people would be shocked to see how well prepared Washington is. And experts say this once again shows Trump's determination to up the pressure on Pyongyang, especially as he has his first presidential tour of Asian countries, including South Korea, China, and Japan in early November.
You would think that he would try to moderate the tone in order to set a good mood for his visit with the leaders in the region. But it seems as though the president is signaling that he has no intention to do that, which shows that he is determined to address this issue in the way he has committed his administration as far as the North Korean problem is concerned.
Trump also stood firm on his thoughts about China's role over Pyongyang, but this time he took a different approach. Unlike his recent comments slamming China for doing nothing to solve the issue, Trump rather softened his tone and said the Chinese President Xi Jinping is a good man and that the two leaders have an exceptional relationship. But by claiming that 93% of things going into North Korea come through China, Trump added that Beijing could do more.
So, wrapped with positive comments, Trump's words work to pressure Xi. Trump is repeating the message that Beijing has considerable power over Pyongyang and that China must do more to solve this nuclear issue.
But with the two leaders so firm on their policies, the expert expects the struggle between the two countries to continue during their meeting next month.
A senior North Korean diplomat has said Pyongyang will not hold talks of any kind with the US.
Release. Have booster ignition and full thrust. Hydraulics are good.
Chesoni, the regime's Director General for North American Affairs, said they will not be giving up their nuclear weapons and stressed Washington needs to accept North Korea as a nuclear state.
North Korean diplomat Chesoni was speaking Saturday in a closed-door session at a conference on non-proliferation in Moscow. She reportedly said Pyongyang will not respond to any proposal for negotiations such as the six-party nuclear talks until the U.S. ends what she called its hostile policy towards Pyongyang. According to an anonymous participant at the session, Che said the North is living under constant threat from the U.S. and that processing nuclear weapons is a matter of life and death for the reclusive state. She added that those threats from the U.S. have made Pyongyang only more certain that it needs nuclear weapons to defend itself.
See what happens. Now, with that being said, we're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are. If we need to be. Would it be nice not to do that? The answer is yes. Will that happen? Who knows?
And concluded that Washington has no choice but to accept that North Korea is a nuclear state. Che is North Korea's Director General for North American Affairs, and her remarks on Saturday are in line with those she made at another meeting on Friday, when she delivered a statement to the press.
DPRK's nuclear weapons are non-negotiable unless the U.S. is prepared to coexist with the nuclear DPRK, because this is the only way to ensure lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and the stability and security in the Northeast Asia.
South Korea's deputy nuclear envoy was also at the conference, as well as several former U.S. officials, prompting speculation that there could be interaction of some kind with Che. Seoul's Yonhap News reports that although she is said to have greeted the South Korean diplomat informally, no formal meeting was arranged. Japan's Asahi Shimbun also reports that she did not respond to a Japanese official's request for a meeting. She did, however, hold separate talks with Oleg Burmistrov, a senior Russian official. Jong-Un.
That the military option was going to be put back on the table, that our policy is simply this, to denuclearize entirely North Korea.
North Korea.
As soon as Donald Trump became U.S. president, he sent Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis to the region to announce that the policy of strategic patience with North Korea was over.
That the military option was going to be put back on the table, that our policy is simply this, to denuclearize entirely North Korea. Until such time as they do that, then we are going to be moving towards economic sanctions, maximum pressure, isolation of the regime, and also having a military option on the table as a last resort.
The Trump administration has successfully brought about new wide-ranging UN sanctions against the North Korean regime. But as in the past, such moves require help from Beijing.
And the reason is simple, it's money. China controls 90 to 95% of the Korean economy. They have the land border with North Korea. They control the ocean and the sea around it if they desire to. China could shut down North Korea instantly.
General Keane agrees that a diplomatic solution depends on involving China.
China is completely complicit here. They tolerated North Korea having nuclear weapons. They tolerated North Korea having ballistic missiles. They tolerated North Korea developing intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Despite China's condemnation of Pyongyang's latest nuclear and missile activities, it hopes to avoid a collapse of the North Korean regime and the refugee influx across the border. But some experts argue that without China's help in solving the problem, South Korea and Japan are at risk.
What happens if South Korea asks the United States to return nuclear weapons to the peninsula, or they say we need our own nuclear program? I mean, how could you deny that to them? Japan, which has already reinterpreted its constitution a bit to at least allow collective self-defense, real collective self-defense. What about perhaps offensive systems in the face of this threat? Vietnam, where does this stop?
China has choices to make in the time ahead. I hope they choose to stand with the rest of the world and the United States and create a diplomatic outcome here.
The Trump administration is reviewing its China policy. It's expected to be complete before the president embarks on a trip to East Asia in November. Yela De Franceschi, VOA News, Washington.
You name your position and then we'll ask these folks to...
Totally prepared for the second option, not a preferred option, but if we take that option, it will be devastating, I can tell you that, devastating for North Korea. That's called the military option. If we have to take it, we will. He's acting very badly. He's saying things that should never, ever be said. And we're replying to those things, but it's a reply. It's not an original statement, it's a reply. But the things that he said over the last year, and if you look back, the things that he said to past administrations, North Korea is a situation that should have been handled 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, and it could have been handled much more easily. You had various administrations, many administrations, which left me a mess. But I'll fix the mess.